It's time for Trench Talk, for your weekly infusion of metal and otherwise heavy music. I'm your host, Flight of Icarus from MetalTrenches.com. As always, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel, because there's plenty more where this came from. And today, I am here again with Chris Dahlberg, who writes for MetalTrenches.com. If you want to say hey.
Hey. Glad to be back on the podcast.
Yeah. And we're going to do an extravaganza of kind of 2019 in review so far. This is going to come out at about the halfway point of the year. And I like to break the year into two parts because there's just too many albums. And I find when I try to do a top 10 of the whole year, I just feel like I'm missing out on so much stuff. And there's so many other things I want to shout out. Now, I did scale down a little bit this year because in the past, I would do 3 top 10 lists, one for each of the rating scales, so enjoyability, musicianship, and innovation. And so by the end of the year, you'd have 60 albums to look at, which some people like, some people that's probably too much. Me, I just came to it this year and I'm like, I just can't, like, it's just too much. So I'm just going to do 10 for the first half and I'll do 10 for the second half. And Chris has some albums to talk about as well. So without bearing the lead, I guess we should just jump into it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you put it that way because top 10 lists are always hard because so much comes out in December.
Yeah,
I feel like
seriously.
there's that tendency to be like, well, this is what I've been listening to all week, so we'll just throw this December one in, and it kind of like jumps ahead of stuff you forgot about from the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and it also will like throw a stick in your spokes like at the last minute. Like I've had years where I like tried to wait it out and I thought I finally had my 10 locked in, and then like the last 2 weeks of December they throw something in there. I'm like, dang it. So half the time I'll end up just rolling that into the next year because I'm just too annoyed to bother with adjusting.
Yeah, this happened
everything.
last year actually. Like Fallen Empire and like Hell's Headbangers and a couple other labels dropped a whole bunch of stuff on like December 28th, and I was just like, can we just call it 2019 at this point?
Yeah. Like I kind of get throwing stuff out like right before Christmas because, you know, people are, you know, getting stuff for the holidays. But when it's like after Christmas, I'm like, what the hell? Can you just wait till January? Like maybe there's some marketing thing
to it at that point.
Yeah, I don't know. But all right, so I don't want to drag this intro on too long. I figure I'll just throw one of mine out first since I have more than you do. So kicking this list off, and these are kind of sort of in order, but not really locked in. But anyways, my first choice is Indianapolis hardcore mathcore trio Olam, which stands for Of Lions and Men. And these guys put out I Will Guide Your Hand, and it's amazing. If you are a fan of things like Converge and Botch and Baptist, highly recommend this one. It's definitely influenced by Converge, and it touched me in multiple places, and that doesn't sound right, but you know, it touched me on 2 levels really, because you've got the musicianship piece where it does have a lot of those kind of mathcore and metalcore vibes that I grew up with. And so it's got a kind of nostalgic side to it. And then also from a lyrical standpoint, they're describing this as like a musical journey through a traumatic experience. And since that's my professional field, it seemed appropriate that I just formed a really strong connection with this one. And yeah, definitely check it out. If you like albums like Jane Doe and You Fail Me, it's definitely got a flavor of that. But then Olam are kind of bringing their own sort of style to it. So it doesn't just feel like a direct knockoff. Because God knows there's a lot of bands out there who love them some Converge and like to go after that style.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
That is my first pick.
All right, so on to my first pick. I'll just preface this by saying that nothing is in order. I literally just kind of tried to trim down as much as I could. I'm actually being pickier this year than normal because normally I would start this list and look at all the scores and probably have about 20 albums, but I took the approach of this time of, okay, what am I still thinking about, right now, regardless of what I scored it. So the first one that comes to mind is Funeral Presence's Achadius, which came out back in February via the Ajna Offensive in North America and Sepultura Voice Records in Europe. So Funeral Presence is the solo project of the Negative Plane drummer, Bestial Devotion. It's the second full length, and it's black metal done the old school way. So it's kind of a combination of first and second wave black metal with a lot of kind of complex song compositions. There's some old school heavy metal in there that reminds me of Mel Carpenter and just like how good the riffs were. The vocals are they go between this screaming and almost like clean chanting that almost has this like otherworldly kind of ethereal feel to it. It's pretty much everything that I liked about the first Funeral Presence back in 2014 taken to another level. And considering that Negative Plane hasn't released an album since 2011, I think it's a good way of filling the gap with some similar sounding music, but you can tell that this solo project really goes its own way. And it's a lot to take in, but anyone that likes first and second wave black metal and wants to go towards stuff that knows it's old school and kind of wears that proudly, I very highly recommend it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you've been covering some of these black metal albums because, I don't know, for whatever reason, just a lot of it hasn't connected with me this year, or maybe like some of the stuff may have not even just wound up in my rotation. And so I always want to make sure that we're hitting up as many genres as we can. But for me, honestly, I think the year that Shamash's Triangle came out was like the biggest year in black metal for me. But since then, it's been kind of slim pickings for me. There's been a few albums that like I really love, but not a whole bunch of them. But I remember that year, like I had a whole handful of black metal releases I wanted to share with everyone.
I would say for me, it's pretty consistent. I always, have a couple that sneak in, and this is probably one of the more traditional ones. I mean, it's definitely doing its own thing, but I mean, in general, I review so much to begin with just because black metal is so appealing that I think people will be surprised that, like, for me, Funeral Presence is better than, like, Miss Therming and Deathspell Omega, so it's a pretty big year, but I'm definitely being very selective and going towards what really clicks.
So you would put it above those two? I don't think I've listened to it
at least right
yet.
now,
I'll have
based
to
on
check it
kind of
out then.
how I feel about the riffs.
Yeah, because those were two of the ones that did stand out to me this year. So if this is more impressive than that, then I need to get around to it. I'm not sure why I haven't yet.
And it could just be listening preference too. I mean,
Yeah.
All that's very good. So
Yes, indeed. All right. My next pick is Austin, Texas-based trio Glassing, who kind of mix post-hardcore and post-metal with some kind of ambient and more just sort of atmospheric flair. The album's called Spotted Horse. I put these in that album from Olam kind of in the same camp because they both have this very just sort of emotional vibe to them, and I very much connected with them on that level where it's not even necessarily about like the technicality of it or the musicianship or whatever. Like it's more so just like a feeling. And these just both are so impressive. I love just how punctuated all the howls are. It's got this really cold feel to it too. Like I even said in my review that I can almost like feel the cold on my face like when I'm listening to it. It's got kind of tinges of sort of like the Norwegian and just basically like the Scandinavian scenes hardcore. It's got a lot of that feel to it as well. Things like Eglise and even a little bit of like Hexus. So it's got this like darkness to it too. I've also heard allusions to Oathbreaker and Alcest. The Drowned God was another thing that stuck out in my mind as a comparison. But yeah, just it's got this weight to it. And you almost feel like you're like climbing this like insanely like you're climbing to the top of like a mountain in like freezing cold temperature, and there's a certain satisfaction to it, and it's kind of motivating too in this weird way. So really love that album. And yeah, if I could rate like the two probably just most purely kind of mood music emotional albums that I'm really digging this year, it would be Spotted Horse and Again, I Will Guide Your Hand.
I've actually listened to Glassing a little bit, not as in depth as you have, but I remember it making a good first impression, kind of when the promo first came in. So I would say for me, I just haven't had enough time with it to say where it would rank on my list, but I think it's one that might have some overlap later on.
Yeah. And I feel like it's a hard album to just kind of sample. Like it really is one that you have to kind of listen from start to finish to really sort of get the whole sort of conceptual feel of it. Like there's definitely standout tracks, but it just works better as a whole because there's a lot of kind of dynamic range and ups and downs. And
yeah, I know it grabbed me really early just from that promo, just because it was kind of like noise rocky and post-hardcore, and I was like, yeah, this is a mixture where you don't get as many bands doing that. You know, there's a very selective number of bands that I feel like do that kind of sound and do it well. So it's always really cool when you hear it.
Yeah, and they definitely do it well. So I would, and there's I mean, that's kind of like my favorite area right now. I feel like I've been listening to a lot more hardcore and post-hardcore, and so I have been hearing quite a few bands doing that. So it was kind of cool to me to have this really stand out from the group in that way.
All right, so moving on, I'm just going to jump around a little bit. The next one that I'm going to talk about is the newest Laster album, which is the first 10 of the year that I've given, and I don't actually know how many more will end up this year, but Laster is a band that I've been following pretty much since they started, and they started off as a very traditional kind of sprawling Burzum type black metal band, and as they've gone along, they've started to incorporate a lot more post-punk and just get really weird with how they're doing things. So the new album, it's a Dutch name, so I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. It's Het Wassen Oog. It's the first album that they put out on Prophecy Productions, and it's really just, you have to hear it to understand just how crazy it is, because it's kind of like it'll go black metal, then all of a sudden you'll get reminded of like post-punk, like Killing Joke, but there's a little bit of like the over-the-top progressive avant-garde nature of like Vedbuen's End and Flirty and some of the more weird black metal bands from over the years. And the vocals are all over the place, like even when they're doing kind of like groovy post-punk with like bass heavy sections, you'll have like straight up just howling and shrieking over top of it. And it's a very challenging release. I think out of everything I have on here, it might be the weirdest for people to click with, but for someone like me that's like super into shoegaze and post-punk and just music that's generally weird along with the black metal edge, it's like just so fresh sounding, and it really pushes into kind of newer territory for me.
Yeah, and it was an album that I actually had in my maybe pile for a little while because I was intrigued by just how like words can't describe quite how strange it is, and I have been hankering for something a little bit more out there.
Yeah, and I like how committed to it they are. Like, you know, going back to, I think it was either their first or second full length, it was still kind of traditional black metal, but it had this kind of weird dancey kind of post-punk song at the end where you're like, I wonder what they're going to do next. And the next album, they did more of that. And it's like every time I think they can't get weirder, they seem to like throw more into the mix and be like, you thought wrong.
Yeah. We need more bands doing that too. There's just so much of the same.
They wear like alien masks and stuff on stage. They've got this like weird stage presence. So I really hope to see them live at some point. It's almost like, it almost looks like the Plague Doctor mask meets like an alien kind of thing.
Awesome. All right. My next one is Nashville-based technical death metal darlings Inferi, and they re-recorded and reissued their second full-length album. I freaking adore this. The end of an era rebirth is what it's called, and I never really, especially in the top 10, like when I'm covering my favorite albums, I never do reissues. I never do re-recordings because I just feel like it's almost like a cheat. It's like, well, it didn't really come out this year, but Malcolm and company like did such an amazing job with turning this into just something completely fresh and new. Like it really does fit in with their current discography. I did an interview with Malcolm and was really glad to kind of pick his brain about it and hear about the process. And it's cool that, you know, we get the whole current lineup of the band working on this together, and it's just so good. Like I was so addicted to it. I had a really hard time moving on from this to other albums that I really needed to get to and review, and I still keep going back to it. You know, as far as tech death goes, it's not the most original thing out there. Like it's definitely got the same vibes as the, you know, there's things like Sarah. I described it as kind of like it's as technical as Serox, but then also as like infectious and catchy as the Black Dahlia Murder. And again, all familiar elements, but even so, it's just done. It's like the blueprint done perfectly. And it's so memorable and amazing drumming, amazing guitar. I was so pissed that I wasn't able to go to their show when they were here. I was all set up to go, and then I just had some unavoidable things that I had to take care of during that same weekend. But hopefully I'll get another chance to see them live, and I highly recommend. I mean, everybody seems to be loving this album. I've yet to see somebody who like hates it. But yeah, that is my next pick, is The End of an Era Rebirth from Inferi.
And they've really blown up recently. Like, I think I have a lot of friends that are into tech death a lot more than I am, and I've seen a lot of Facebook posts about this band over the past year or two.
Yeah.
You know, even since the album came out last year, and then
yeah,
you know,
and Revenant was on my top 10 last year too.
Yeah, I was confused when I got the promo because I didn't read it at first, and I was like, they just had an album last year. Like, what is this?
Yeah.
So I thought it was cool because you could tell that a lot of work went into that, even though it's like so close to the last album that they really thought it through. I haven't listened to all of it. I really did enjoy the last album though, and that's coming from somebody that doesn't listen to a lot of tech death and tends to listen to promos and turn them off just because they all sound the same. But
yeah, and they do.
I think this is a band
no
that for me
there.
actually clicks really well.
Yeah, it's just so good. Like, and you're right. Like they're blowing up, and Malcolm's building himself a nice little empire. Like this is a huge year for the Artisan era. And I have loved pretty much everything they put out this year. So in addition to his work,
is that
on
his label?
Yeah, that's his label. He's just been killing it, and all the bands I've been interviewing just have nothing but good things to say about him. And just cool guy, man. Like people know him by name, and he's building a brand, and people respond to that. So they even have like a whole Facebook group that's absolutely hilarious that I was glad that I got invited to join.
I'll take it, man. Somebody has to challenge Unique Leader. I mean, Unique Leader is very important for the genre, but I feel like they've kind of stagnated a bit. So it's nice to see another label find stuff that kind of invokes the similar kind of holy shit factor that Unique Leader had maybe 10 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, I feel like the Artisan era is taking more chances. They've been more consistent, whereas Unique Leader, it's kind of hit and miss for me. With, I feel like probably a little bit more miss than hit, but I will give Unique Leader credit for a few things they've done, especially signing, what's that band's name? Exocrine. That's what it is, Exocrine. But anyways, let's move on to the next one.
Next one, I'm going to go to a pretty obvious pick, well, maybe for me at least. So we're going to talk about Inner Arma's new one, Sulphur English, which I must admit is not a huge leap for them compared to the last one, but I just love this band so much. And being from Richmond, They're only a couple hours away, so I've seen them quite a bit over the years, and it's been interesting to just see them continue to expand and move outwards and kind of get denser and denser in their music. So this is yet another release from Relapse. I think they've been on them for the past couple records, and you could just call them sludge doom as a base level, but there's so much more going on here. There's, if you look at a song like Citadel, that straight up just sounds like Morbid Angel. They go like full death metal at points, then they'll go sludge, they'll go doom, it's a much darker record. The last one was a lot more psychedelic and it had brighter moments. This just sounds like it's going to drag you down to hell. And then when you least expect it, they throw in this almost like Americana type with like clean vocals that almost remind me of like Huntsman on the song Stillness, where you're like, whoa, it's like an Americana folk vibe, kind of they just pour the world down and you're like dealing with the remnants. And it's super cool, again, not super different for them, but they've been so unique from everybody else for at least the past 3 or 4 years that I'm okay with that.
Yeah. And this was one of the few albums on your list that I actually spent a decent amount of time listening to. Really did enjoy it. It is interesting. It did feel different from some of their previous stuff to me in that it just felt more atmospheric. There was more kind of like ambient stuff going on, more dynamics. And it really is a journey. And yeah, I love...
It's like a scary atmosphere this time. It definitely felt like they went for that as opposed to... Before, I had some bright spots, I feel like.
Yeah. And I mentioned in our last episode that we did together that I'm really picky when it comes to Doom. And so this is one of those bands, though, that definitely falls right in line with what I want when I listen to Doom, because you've got those kind of more aggro, sludgy elements. There's those really heavy, almost like death metal moments, and it gives me enough variety. And the pacing's just right that it just clicks for me. And yeah, more of that, please.
Yeah, you could almost just call it extreme metal because they really hop around pretty much every genre of it.
Yeah. And I really did love, I love that you described it as kind of this like Americana, like folk vibe, because I got that too. It felt like kind of standing in a desert at times. and
when they released that track, I was just like, whoa, where did this come from?
Yeah, I dug it though. Like when I have to do a double take while I'm just listening to music, I'm like, that's the mark of like these guys are doing something correct. All right, moving on. Got Spain-based blackened atmospheric technical death metal band Alterage, who I feel like have gone 3 for 3 at this point.
Or is it Alteraje because they're Spanish?
Oh, yeah, that's true. I could be pronouncing it completely wrong. The band has yet to correct me, and they actually did reach out and thank me for reviewing the album. And usually people are pretty forthcoming, although some bands are a little bit more like they don't want to rock the boat and make somebody mad. So if I am pronouncing that wrong, then by all means correct me, because I want to get it right. But yeah, that's Through Season of Mist. I have loved these guys since I discovered them on my time spent on Metal Storm when I used to be on there all the time. And can't remember if it just popped up or somebody recommended them to me. But I was kind of just going down the rabbit hole of learning all about Portal and stuff. And so if you're into Portal, these guys are very much in that same style, also like Abyssal and Malthusian. The new album's called The Approaching Roar, and again, it's their third, and all 3 of their albums have been amazing. I will say that I think I liked the second one the best so far, but this one's like really close. And it's still got those same, everything I love about it atmospherically. Like, it's just got this slimy, coiling quality to it. Almost the same descriptors I use for like Deathspell Omega, but much more aggressive, much more kind of like suffocating. You feel like you're being like squeezed like by like a python or something. And the pacing's just right again. Like, they know just when to kind of like drop down into silence. I've compared them to kind of listening to The Shining in the past. There's just very ominous, insidious vibe to everything. Lots of peaks and valleys, and just great harnessing of tension and quiet dread. And so that's why they absolutely, I knew at the moment I even saw that they were putting another album out, like they've just set themselves up as a brand that I associate with quality so far. So there aren't a lot of bands that I will pre-order from, but this is one of them.
Yeah, I haven't listened to this one in depth as much. I do admit that I missed just how dense the first record was. That was just so overwhelmingly noisy, and that's kind of my taste. So I definitely need to go back and give kind of their more modern stuff a bit more of a listen. I mean, they certainly haven't cleaned up, at all. There's still tons and tons of, dense and complexity to it, but that's just kind of what I've noticed is, with the move to the bigger label definitely polished up things a little bit.
Yeah, but I'm at least glad it's Season of Mist, because I feel like that's a pretty good fit for them. And yeah, it's not going to be quite as raw, but I mean, they're sharing a label. I mean, isn't Portal on Season of Mist right now too? I think Abyssal is as well. Maybe I might be getting that wrong, but
I think
to me it feels like the right
lore.
Oh, you know what? You're right. That would have been a good fit too. But
I'm noticing that trend with a lot of bands. Like even Abyssal sounds cleaner on the songs they've released from the newer stuff. So
I'm so stoked for that record.
Yeah, I am too. It's just it's interesting to notice. It seems like bands like this put out like it's almost like Autocrator too. Their first record is just so loud that people are just like, what is this? And then like the songwriting comes on the next albums.
Yeah, that's especially true of Abyssal. Like their early stuff sounds almost nothing like what they're doing now, and props to them. It's nice to see that progression.
All right, we're going to switch things up completely and move away from extreme metal just for a little bit. So the next pick is going to be the new album from Magic Circle, Departed Souls. Came out on 20 Buck Spin, and this is pure new wave British heavy metal with a little bit of doom. These guys are from, I want to say Rhode Island or something like that. I'll have to look. I know it's the Northeast, but they've just been killing it since they started. They had a little bit more doom when they started. This album actually bounces a lot more heavy metal with kind of psych rock and even a lot of 70s influence. There's a good balance between kind of what I would call blues rock kind of swagger and, your heavy metal swagger, and then a little bit of a hazier kind of melody that goes with it. You've got a singer who just has a crazy amount of range. He doesn't quite go like falsetto range, but his voice just booms over all the instrumentation, and it amps you up. I kind of feel like this is a perfect driving album. You crank it all the way up, you drive down the road, and you just jam to it. And I don't get as much of that from heavy metal these days, so it's great.
Yeah, me neither. Like that's another genre where I have to be just in the right mood. It has to be just the right album, written just the right way, and occasionally something crosses my path that I really do enjoy. So I haven't listened to that one yet, but
all right, correction. They're from Massachusetts. I was close.
Oh, well, look at that. You should have known that.
Well, I saw them live in Rhode Island, so that's probably why my brain was doing that.
Got you. How dare you get one detail about all these bands wrong? All right.
Everyone's going to yell at us.
Yeah, I know. Next up, I've got something in a pretty similar vein to Alterage. So this is Denver-based dissonant, devouring death metal band, as I put it in my review, Noctambulist. And this is their debut full-length album. Came out via Blood Harvest Records and Helter Skelter Productions. And man, these guys just came out of nowhere and blew my mind. If you are a fan of Ulcerate, these guys are playing in a very similar style, and I'm fine with that because the Ulcerite's pretty much the only band truly doing Ulcerite right now. Like, I hear plenty of bands like kind of taking elements from that and bringing it into their music, but these guys just full on admitted in their interview too that they are huge Ulcerite fans and that's like their biggest influence. But I feel like they're taking it in their own direction. It doesn't just feel like a band doing Ulcerate covers. They put their own unique spin on it. I feel like there's a little bit more maybe sort of Blackened vibe to it. And also in their imagery. I love the album cover with the like 3 figures with like the weird stone heads, and influences also from like Deathspell Omega, and again thinking like of Abyssal, but it's just a crushing album, and it feels so appropriate that it's coming out of Denver too, because like I've just come to associate Denver with some of just the most vile, dark, disgusting music out there. And so the album's called Atmospheres of Desolation, and they're already working on new material from my understanding, so I wouldn't be surprised if we see some more from them in the near future. Also just really cool dudes.
I have not listened to this one yet. I'm going to get yelled at for that because my friend that books shows out in Denver under Metal DP has told me multiple times to listen to them. Yeah, man. So I need to get on that.
They're fucking sick. And again, it's always just nice too when you hear an amazing album and then you like, I got to sit down with the full band when we Skyped, and they're all just totally chill, very funny, down to earth dudes. We talked a little bit too about Ethan McCarthy too, sort of being the kind of like the dad of the whole scene over there, and just making sure everything runs smoothly and everybody's cool with him. And yeah,
that makes sense because I think he books stuff now, right?
Yeah,
like I think that's one of the main things that he does now is he runs like a booking company.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to transition over again. So the next one I'm going to talk about is actually one that I haven't written about yet. I've been thinking about it, but I keep trying to find the words for it. It's a band called Elizabeth Color Wheel. It's a debut full-length called Nocebo, and it came out on the Flenser a couple months back. It's an interesting combination. It's at its core, it's kind of shoegaze with a little bit of doom in there, and it kind of builds up with almost like a postcard core kind of like wall of sound at times. So it'll go from like chill shoegaze to just like completely overwhelming instrumentation. And they've got this amazing vocalist who, during some of the parts, she almost has this like soulful swagger that reminds me of like Macy Gray in a weird kind of way.
That's an interesting comparison.
It's a really interesting combination. But then she'll go from that, and when the songs build up, she'll just start full out screaming. And it's such an intense transition that you go from like mellow and like, you know, kind of like zoned out, and you're just like, whoa. And I actually saw this band live right around when the album came out, and unfortunately it was to like a crowd of maybe 10 of us, and they still completely killed it. Like they played like they were in a full room of people, and the energy level was just so immense that I was just like, I really hope this band blows up, you know, in that shoegaze kind of scene in the next year or two, because they totally deserve to be playing bigger rooms.
Yeah. I'm not going to forgive you for saying Macy Gray, because now I've got that damn song stuck in my head.
I think you should listen to this one and tell me if I'm crazy or not. Like, that's just...
yeah, you caught my attention. It's funny when... I love drawing comparisons like that, too. The big one last year was we were all talking about how... and this is not an insult at all, because I freaking love that Cult Leader album, but everyone's talking about how he sounds like the dude from Crash Test Dummies when he's doing the singing. Man. And I'm like, that's such a great comparison. And it was a case too where it was like multiple reviewers brought that up without, I think, having heard it from each other, because I put in my review, and before I had posted it, somebody else mentioned it. In fact, I think Christian from Mathcore Index brought it up on their podcast, and I was like, damn it, now he said it first and they're going to think that I copied them. But no, like I already was thinking the same thing.
I like when
Yeah,
heavy, angry music reminds you of stuff that's totally not that at all.
yeah, totally. All right, next is the debut from Icelandic progressive black metal group whose name I'm probably still pronouncing wrong, but again, nobody's like stepped up to truly tell me how I'm supposed to pronounce it, but I'll say Kaleikr, Kaleikr. This has members of Draugsol. The album came out via Debaber Morty Productions, and it's called Heart of Lead. And it's just got this great palette of kind of all of my favorite black metal and progressive influence. It's really more so like, I'd say it's like an extreme progressive album that kind of steals elements from all of the stuff that I just loved so much from that style. So I hear everything from like, there are certain parts that reminded me of Insomnium's Winter's Gate. I was also thinking of like Draugr with Hunger Undying at times. Definitely really strong mid-career Enslaved vibes, especially when I hear kind of almost like Tool elements sometimes. So I was thinking of albums like Run, and yeah, just so engrossing, a little bit psychedelic too. You get that kind of from the album cover as well, but just all over the place. And I also like too that they do something that I think is so important, where they tread this line between what is kind of catchy and will draw more casual listeners in to begin with, and then the song will build away from that into kind of more technical, challenging, and complex material. So I think it's a great like gateway album in that way for people who are kind of curious about checking out some more weird progressive music and they're not sure where to start. Because again, like the compositions start off kind of straightforward and it's got those familiar elements. Like again, just the fact that I'm throwing Tool out there, I think a lot of people can sort of latch on to that, but then they will take it in a completely different direction.
I haven't listened to this one at all. I've been meaning to. Honestly, I will say that unless I know a band really well, sometimes when I see it on the review list and you or Dave have claimed it, sometimes I just shelve it for a little bit till I have some more personal time, just so that we can get so much more covered.
Yeah.
But I do remember seeing it and thinking that the album cover was really cool looking, so I do plan on returning to it at some point.
Yeah, I think you'll like it. And I do the same thing. Like, I will shelve it sometimes. There's certain ones though that I definitely like want to get to right away. Like I knew you were covering Enthroned, but I was still curious to kind of hear what the album sounded like, and I've been enjoying that one. But yeah, I mean, there's so much to get to, and so yeah, there will be certain times where I'll just kind of put something aside for a while before I actually get to it, because I know that usually either you or Dave is going to take care of business with that.
That's why I don't fight over it too much. There's very few bands that I will actually like absolutely have to write about.
Yeah. We may fight over Abyssal. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have to do a joint episode or something.
All right, so how about time to transition over to another Icelandic black metal band that just released an album 4 days ago, but I've already put it on this list. It is the debut from Andevald. It came out via Mistis Chaos, which is kind of a newer label that has Alex Poole from Skafe and some collaboration with the Icelandic guys, and it's kind of the new Fallen Empire. Some of Fallen Empire's resources have gone into it, so this album is very mysterious. All of the descriptions are in Icelandic, and from what I attempted to translate, it mentions DG. So DG from Miss Therming is somehow involved in this, and it's just when it came out the other day, I put it on, and it was basically everything that I've been looking for in black metal recently. Like, it's not super fast. There's an emphasis on very slow kind of methodical instrumentation. It just sounds terrifying. It sounds like all my nightmares come to life, and the vocals are just like straight up over the top. They almost remind me of the first Svarty Dowdy album, where he's just like sounds totally inhuman. You've got one song towards the end where he just does this laugh where he sounds like he's going insane as he's recording the track.
Nice.
And everything is over the top. It's pretty concise. There's an opening and a closing kind of ambient track with the three lengthy pieces in between. And some of the slower instrumentation actually reminds me a little bit of like Solar Temple and all of the kind of like Netherlands black metal scene that's been going on recently. So there's a good balance of like twisted melodies and just like dense instrumentation, and it's super appealing.
It's so hard to get that right too, because like if you go all out like that, it can, I feel like most times actually, it ends up being like super cringy. I almost, in my head, I'm picturing like, it's the difference between Heath Ledger's Joker and Jared Leto's Joker.
Yeah, absolutely.
When Jared Leto like does it and he goes over the top, it's like, for me, it's super cringy. And like, even though I think Jared Leto's an amazing actor, but for some reason that just did not work. Whereas Heath Ledger also went all in, but in a completely different way, and it was believable. So when a band's able to pull that off...
It honestly sounds like there might be hallucinogens or some kind of like mind-altering substances involved in the performance, because it's just so natural.
Yeah, almost disturbing when it feels that natural. Oddly enough, that reminds me of the old days listening to like the first 4 Korn albums, when Jonathan Davis would have like breakdown moments in the studio. And I mean, some people probably think that's cringy, but I think that's just an example, though, to me of something that feels genuine. And still, even when I listen to it now, I'm just like, oh man, like there's a dude that's going through some shit.
It feels like when you hear a performance like that nobody like thought about it ahead of time. Some bands you can tell they're like, hey, in this part, let's try and sound as insane as possible. It just sounds like that just kind of happened.
Yeah.
And you're just like, whoa, wait, what?
Yeah, and that is something I so crave, I think, from really any medium, like movies, TV, and then especially music. Like, it has to feel genuine. If it feels forced in any way, then that's usually the line where it stops being fun and entertaining, and it just becomes kind of a grind and uncomfortable at times, like awkward.
That's why I like the Icelandic black metal scene so much, because they all feel authentic in what they do, and they're all doing something slightly differently.
Yeah, they're killing it. Like they're really building a really cool scene out there. I freaking loved seeing Zrine live, and yeah, there's some pretty major bands doing some pretty cool things out there.
And it's really funny for me because Miss Thurming was like on my maybe list, and then this came out like as I was making the list, and I was like, I think DG's in this, and this whoop, okay, they knocked it out.
That was a big week too. Like I mentioned it before, but that was a big week of kind of a big 2 to 3 week period of black metal releases, just all of a sudden spilling out all at the same time.
And people are going to say, why do you not have Wormlust in there? Because I need way more time to take in that one. That one's just nuts.
All right, moving on to, I guess some people will probably class this in with black metal, but it's more so post-black. Calgary band, Numenorian, absolutely had to be on this list. Very anticipated follow-up. These guys definitely blew up with their last album, and I was interested to see where they went next. That was an album that I was not as in love with as many people. There were certain songs on there that I really loved. So I was kind of like lukewarm going into this one, but every listen, it has just grown on me exponentially. And I'm just so impressed by what a leap forward it is. Like, this is not just a band moving from like step 1 to step 2. Like, they fucking jumped like 10 steps with this thing. And the album's called Adore, which I will say correctly this time. Everybody's getting mad at me because I'm saying Adore. But I'm saying Adore because growing up, I was a big Smashing Pumpkins fan. And they had a song which I always believe was pronounced Ava Adore. And maybe I'm wrong on that one too. Maybe that's just Ava Adore. But that's where I was getting. They actually have an album called Adore too. And again, maybe that's just Adore, and I've been saying it wrong this whole time. But that is why I'm saying Adore. So I will draw. I think that just sounds cooler too, but I will call it Adore from now on. But in any case, semantics aside, just a stunning album. Really incredible how they stepped up their game in all departments, especially the songwriting. So much more ambitious. Like their last album was just kind of a straightforward post-black album, sort of doing the same things that everybody in the genre is doing. But here, definitely a lot more progressive influences here, obvious kind of Gojira references, and maybe that's unintentional, but it just feels so strong. Like there's certain parts where I'm like, this is straight out of a Gojira song. And to hear that combined so seamlessly with the post-black elements is amazing. It's more melodic, but also more heavy where it needs to be, and they just take it to all the right places. There was like a handful of moments where I was sort of like, okay, they could tweak this and they could tweak that, but even with the imperfections, it's just such an amazing step forward, and they deserve all the success in the world, and I'm super excited to see where they go next from this one.
I guess I'll have to actually listen to it then. And I'll be honest, I skipped this one because I found Home it didn't click with me the same way that it did with a lot of other people. It just kind of sounded like what I expected from that genre and nothing more. Yeah. So if they've definitely switched up a lot more, then I am interested.
Oh yeah, it's almost a completely different band is what it feels like. Because I was right there with you. Like I was not super impressed. I enjoyed it. And I liked it better than a lot of other post-black I was hearing, but it still kind of felt like relatively vanilla, middle-of-the-road stuff, pretty safe. And with this one, not at all. Like, they have gone a completely different direction.
All right, so my last pick, since I'm only up to 7, is pretty obvious for people that have read the site recently. It's going to be Daifago's I the Devil, which came out on Hell's Headbangers, and I have to preface by saying this, that I have not been able to get into this band over the past couple albums. So they've always been a band that I've wanted to like more than I have, because they just do super, super dense black death metal with like crazy solos and just constant wall of sound, but the production's always kind of bothered me. I always felt like it was just bearing everything. And even when they got Colin Marston for the last one, it still felt like I couldn't hear a damn thing. But this time around, they went with the combination of Kurt Ballou and Brad Boatwright, who that's like a 1-2 punch of, they can make your band just sound amazing. And so what's interesting about this is now you can hear all the details. The drums are super in your face because this is what, Brad Boatwright's stuff tends to do. But you can hear all the guitar details. The bass is still kind of buried a little bit, but you can hear the crazy guitar solos. The vocals are just over, like, outright crazy and in your face. And what I do find interesting is that because Kurt Ballou kind of worked on this in the mixing, there are some guitar tones where I'm like, this kind of sounds like Blasphemy Run through Converge. Because there's still a little bit of a Converge sound to the guitar tone. I mean, it might just be because it rubs off whenever he does that.
Yeah, well, I feel like Kurt can't touch an album without that element seeping in on some level. Like, it comes into the guitars and also certain areas of the drums as well.
Yeah, and this is just, for probably the first time in a while, this is something that I would call war metal, where it doesn't feel one-dimensional to me. It's got a lot of different things happening with tempo changes and riffs where I actually, even without putting it on right now, I actually have certain song portions in my head that like stand out from one another. And I can't think of too many albums that fall into this genre that, that they're just they don't sound different. So you did end up checking this one out, didn't you?
Yeah, I listened to it. I definitely didn't love it as much as you did. But I definitely, it was another one in my maybe pile. It was one that I came back to a few times to listen to a track here and there. I've been so busy, especially like just with, now doing the podcast and the YouTube stuff. I've like less and less time to invest into as many bands as I used to. So I've had to be a lot pickier. So ultimately it was one where I was just like, okay, good. Chris has got it. He knows what he's doing with this one. And so I just didn't spend as much time with it. But I saw, anytime I see Kurt's name attached to a project, I'm immediately like, all right, well, I have to at least listen to it.
Yeah, and everything just feels like a huge step up. This is one where I listen to it on my daily commutes on a regular basis with it blaring out the window as I drive through the city just because it's so over the top and like
fuck yeah.
It's so angry, and it's actually kept me from getting to some of the other stuff I should write about because I keep listening to it too much.
Yeah, I've had a few like that. And I've seen a lot of people giving this one that you're not alone in that. They're giving it that same positive attention. And so clearly it's catching on. All right. Changing gears completely again. This is one that whenever I bring up this band, it's always like half of the listeners are like, yeah, fuck yeah, awesome. And the other half are like, oh, these guys again. But I have to, these top 3 bands, or albums rather, are definitely like ranked in order. So I have to give it to progressive metalcore band Periphery for their album Hail Stan. I'm a huge fan of these guys. I'm pretty unapologetic about it. Like, I know like it's become kind of like trendy to sort of shit on these guys just because they're like so mainstream now. They're so popular. And anytime a band gets big and has like a clean sound and has a certain fan base that some people don't like them, and obviously they don't really fit in. They're like the complete antithesis of what like the extreme metal crowd is into. But hey, I'm perfectly fine, as you can tell from my list here, listening to the darkest, dingiest, most technical, aggressive stuff out there, but then also listening to something super catchy, and that's what this album is. Now, on top of that, Periphery, there was no surprise to me that it was super catchy and that I would like it, but what was a surprise to me is that they are another band, kind of like Numenorian, where they have just stepped things up to a huge degree. I was not expecting to press play on this album and have the very first song be, I forget how long it is now. It's like between like 15 and 20 minutes. And that's the opening track. And I was like, okay, I don't know what to expect from this, but it's like a freaking like Between the Buried and Me song, basically. Like
That's a ballsy move, too.
Yeah, it is. It really is. But it holds up. It became one of my favorite tracks on the album. And they're doing just so many different things. Like they have that, which is like its own, that could have been like its own standalone prog opus, like EP. And that would have been fine. But then they've also got super aggressive tracks that are like the heaviest things they've ever done. They've got a track that's like the poppiest track that I've ever heard from them. That kind of reminded me of like Coheed's poppier moments where they're just kind of making a straight up radio song. And I love every second of it. There's a track on here that's like experimental, like dance music pretty much. Like it has like a dance beat in it and it's super weird, but then it closes out with like strings and it's all over the place. So I still stand by, this is one of my favorite things I've written this year, just as like a tagline that you would see on like a sticker for the album. And so thankful too that Periphery and also Spencer on their Twitter accounts posted the review, and I believe they posted this quote with it, but I'd said that they're basically to metalcore what Ihsahn has become to black metal, because they've just like totally transcended the original genre that they came from and are now just like something way beyond that that's hard to fully put into words. And yeah, just an amazing job. I'm in awe of this band too, because I've been listening to them for a long time, ever since Icarus Lives came out. And just to see them not only take on like the musicianship and songwriting so seriously and improve and get better from album to album, but also really take the marketing seriously, take the business side seriously. And they're another band that's really built a strong brand, and you can see the results of that. So much respect to them. I'll shut up now and stop drooling over it, because I already did 2 other videos talking about I did one on the album, and then I did another one just sort of chronicling their evolution in songwriting over 10 songs over the years. But yeah, amazing stuff.
And I haven't listened to this band in a really long time, but the kind of progression you talk about reminds me of kind of Between the Buried and Me when I think of,
Oh yeah,
it's Colored. Colors like a decade ago. You listen to that, and there's one point where you're like, wait, is there circus music in here?
Yeah.
That kind of experimentation. And I like when bands go through that, because, if you're kind of a current gent or metalcore band at this point, I feel like you have to reinvent yourself at some point down the road. So
Yeah.
It's cool to see bands successfully do that while still having parts that don't really alienate the old fan base either.
Yeah. The other thing I've been thinking about as I've been talking about Periphery with people and just thinking about them as a band is it kind of makes me feel sorry for Sixth in a way, because I feel like Sixth, I mean, Periphery, I believe they mentioned that they are influenced by Sixth, and they ended up touring with them and everything.
That band was like 10 years too early, weren't they?
Yeah, like that was the thing. Like Sixth just came out at the wrong time. Like they were way ahead of their time. And when I was first getting into them, nobody else knew who they were, and they're still not really as well known. But yeah, I feel like if Sixth had come out maybe 5 years ago instead, then they would be huge. Like the timing just wasn't right. Like for some reason, like Periphery were in the right place at the right time, and they knew how to harness all these elements to just turn it into the well-oiled machine that they are right now. All right, and then my number 2 pick of the year so far is the amazing debut album from Atlanta, Georgia mathcore band, the Callous Daoboys. I have not laughed so hard listening to an album in a long time. And like, I don't even laugh out loud to a lot. Like there's certain things that definitely really get me in the right place. And I just feel like, especially right now where I feel like half of my life is just anxiety constantly with everything going on at home and professionally and in the world and whatever. And so it's always refreshing to just come across things that just honestly make me just die laughing and make me feel good. And this album, Die on Mars, via Dark Trail Records, is just that. And I don't want to oversell the humor either, though, because as hilarious as it is, it's also like they take the songwriting super seriously. Or when I interviewed Carson, if he were here right now, he'd probably say, well, I don't know about that. I don't know how seriously we take it. But even so, it comes across very seriously. Like they do not mess around when it comes to the musicianship. Everything is super technical. And it's kind of like Every Time I Die, where it's like there's these self-deprecating lyrics, and he also throws in these little kind of skits, as he put it, here and there, but they're mixed in perfectly with like really intense and eclectic musicianship. There's parts where it's kind of like the Dillinger Escape Plan, and then other parts where it's almost like Say Anything or like Brand New or something. It reminded me of Glassjaw in certain areas. Just all of my favorite mathcore projects all brought together in one place perfectly, to the point where honestly, like, especially with like sort of this mathcore revival going on, and you know, the Dillinger Escape Plan have kind of like retired, and a lot of these older bands are kind of like they're going, there's not like the big band so much anymore. And I feel like if they want it, the Callous Daoboys could totally take that crown. Like, that's how good this album is. And I don't know if they want that. Talking to Carson, like, I feel like he's content to just like have fun with this and let it be what it is. But again, I think if they go the Periphery route of really getting serious about the marketing and the branding and really making this into something, I could see them being absolutely huge. So do not miss this album. Again, I know some of the more extreme metal listeners are probably going to pass on this one because it's just not hard enough. But man, like if you're into hardcore, if you're into mathcore, metalcore, any of that stuff, whatever, then you should do yourself a favor and check this one out. And definitely listen to my interview with Carson. Was one of my favorites. And it was nice to just like talk about Red Letter Media for like 20 minutes because that's an influence on him. And I love that stuff. So I don't know if you've listened to this album at all, but any thoughts?
I haven't, but I think the description of what I heard reminded me of like Tony Danza Tap Dance Extravaganza.
Oh yeah, it's around that vibe. And then again, like Dillinger Escape Plan, Every Time I Die, it's all over the place.
I wanna know how it feels. You won't make it. You won't make it.
And then my last one, this probably no surprise because I like couldn't shut up about it and brought it up in almost every interview. Even though I was like talking to other bands, it became like a plug for this band. But again, I feel like they deserve it so much and they put so much effort into this album. Chicago progressive death metal band Warforged, again off of the Artisan era, and they put out their full-length debut Voice. I almost said I Voice again, which is kind of like a meme now, but it's just supposed to be a number. It's supposed to be a numeral, so like number 1 parentheses Voice. And goddamn, like I've been so hyped about this for so long because they've only put out like short releases and singles sporadically, but everything they put out was amazing. Like it had this haunting vibe to it. It had just this sort of like unique style to it that even though like there's so many bands doing like progressive technical death metal, they had this like haunting eeriness to them and just this atmosphere that I really loved. And so I've been following them over the years and just been waiting to see when this would happen. So this has been very much a labor of love. Like, again, another band that was cool to talk to and hear about that whole, just the years that went into it. And especially like, I almost teared up a little bit when Adrian was talking about like, I asked them what their favorite moments on the album was, and he talked about just like copying and pasting like the final segment of the last song in, and that realization of like, oh, it's over, was the way he put it. Like, oh my God, like it's like done. And just that I'm even getting like goosebumps now just thinking about what a moment that is, because this is such an undertaking of an album. It's like, it's over an hour long, which is sometimes like a no deal for me, just because again of the massive amount of music I'm trying to cover. So I almost prefer short releases at this point, but every second of it is engaging, amazing dynamics, amazing songwriting. They really set themselves apart. There is this very dreamlike quality to it. I told Adrian I kind of compared it to almost watching like a David Lynch film. And it's a dream that definitely wavers in style. Like, sometimes you'll be having a dream and it'll be like kind of a sort of just, vague experience where there's no sort of emotion to attach to it. Or maybe it's like a good dream and then it slowly devolves into like a nightmare. And there's some great moments of that here where it really just sinks into the darkest depths of just like a personal hell and gets super brutal, super fast, more technical, but then it'll come back again and you get the more kind of like jazzy moments, the more kind of pure prog moments. And it's such a broad spectrum of different styles and volumes. And the closest comparison I could think of was Fallujah, and not so much their most recent one, but their last 2 albums. Like there is kind of a similar vibe. And if we're going by vibes alone, like that would be the closest thing I could think of. But they're really in a class all their own. They deserve all the success in the world. And I say to them too, like, I know, people want their albums on like a regular rotation, but I honestly wouldn't mind if they took another couple of years before they put out the next one, because they've shown that it's worth it. Like it's worth the wait in this case. Too. Yeah. Yeah, and oh man, just I can't shut up about this one.
I've downloaded it. I can't say that I've listened to it that much yet, just because I knew that it was kind of your thing. So it's on the list to listen to, kind of like on a rainy day. And I have seen a lot of hype about it, just outside of our sphere too, just in
Yeah.
general, people talking about things. So that's usually a pretty good sign that it's something that's worth giving a listen to.
Yeah, I go down a rabbit hole every time I listen to it. And it's also like, it's just such an undertaking, not only the musicianship, but then they made a full length video for the entire album, which is something that, some bands do that, but usually they're like signed to a major label and they're getting all this like assistance with the production and everything, but they're doing a lot of it. Like they're carrying most of the load here. And they even also said in the interview that they were really cautious about signing because they put so much effort into it. It's hard to kind of sign some of that away. It's like your baby and you're like giving a piece of it away to other people and you're not sure what they're going to do with it. But I think they probably made the right choice going with the Artisan Era, where they're still going to have kind of a level of freedom and still, get the promotion. And yeah.
And I get that hesitation, because you hear horror stories about, bands that went to the bigger labels where it's like it's not even their stuff anymore. If they want to reissue it, they have to like negotiate with their old labels and stuff. So it's cool to see Artisan Era, as much as it's a label, it almost feels like a collective in a way.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's like a brotherhood almost is what it feels like.
Yeah, they're really trying to be like all the bands, fit together stylistically, but it almost seems like they could just be groups of friends that are spread across the world.
Yeah. And again, like that, the Artisan Era Society Facebook group like adds on to that, because it's just such a shit show of just people like ragging on each other, but like in that really kind of like endearing way. Like people aren't mean, but there's a whole meme on there about like equipoise, and they're like a trash can, and Nick even joins in on that. Like, and I feel like that's part of the brand though. Like that's the smart thing, is like they make these seriously impressive albums, but then they can also like take the shit and just like goof around and be funny, and like you gotta sell part of that too. Like personality does matter, and coming off in a certain way does matter. And we live in this like meme society where like that's that's a big way of like how you carry your
really
message out there. And I mean that's actually the genesis of like what a meme is. I believe, and I've heard this discussed a few times, but I think Richard Dawkins like came up with the term, or someone like that. And it really is like just a term that it has like a Latin root to it or something even, but he basically defined it as like this way that you like make an idea into sort of its own entity, and it carries a message forward. And so that may seem really high concept for the shit that people use it for, but I mean, some of the most successful bands that I know right now are using memes to further their brand and get stuff out there, because that catches people's attention. I know some people groan at that and whatever, but I say, if you don't want to do it, fine. Nobody's forcing you to, but I embrace it because I'm just kind of like, hey, these are the times. And so how am I going to fit this into what I'm doing? And
there's a lot of bands that do that now, like that band Beast Jesus from the Philippines that I sent you. They don't release music that often. Their page is a meme page probably about 80% of the time.
Yep.
And then every so often they'll be like, so here's an EP, and you'll be like, whoa, I forgot you were a band.
Yeah.
Like,
and they'll be super successful. Like, yeah, I've seen other bands do that too, where they may only have like a handful of songs, but because of how they've been able to sell themselves as sort of an overall product and something people are interested in coming back to, they can do quite well. And even like memes aside, I'm even thinking of bands like Frontierer too, where they put out serious music, and I feel like they're not like as, in the sort of memeing community, but that dude still takes that marketing angle very seriously. I mean, to the point where he put out the latest, I think it was a round of vinyl. I can't remember, but he put up like the latest round of some product, and it sold out in a minute.
Damn,
I was like, that's
crazy.
insane, man. Like, and that's just like a dude doing his thing on his own, DIY, and like you can make that happen. And it goes back to what I was talking about with Finn on that Punk Rock MBA episode. Like, if you put the effort in and you don't let your own thoughts get in your way of like, this is like not going to allow me to do this, and this is standing in my way and whatever, like you can, God knows it takes a lot of work. Like, I'm sure that dude like barely sleeps because he's like, he said he already has like the next, what's his other project? Sectioned. He has the next Sectioned album done, I think he said, and he's already writing the new Frontier stuff. And then in between that, he's playing live shows. He's like dealing with the merch end. He's doing all this marketing. He's doing interviews. Like, he's busting his ass. And so if anyone's just like, well, why is he so successful? It's like, well, because he fucking like, there's a downside to it too. It's like you gotta
I
be
really
working
like
all the
bands
time.
that try to do a sense of community. So I look at a lot of bands on Facebook and kind of their social media, and what I think is really cool that bands will get right sometimes is if they're not recording for a little bit, if they're not touring, they'll just post stuff they like. They'll
Yep.
be like, this band we like just released an album, like, check it out, or here's what we think of it. And I like seeing bands do that. That's why I really like Fenris from Darkthrone and all the
Oh, yeah.
recommendations that he gives for old
He's
bands.
great.
Like, they're creating a community, and that's like a much bigger example, but you could do that as a smaller band as you're building your name up and just sharing what you're into and like seeing people connect with that. Like, they'll remember stuff like that.
Yeah. It reminds me of Rogan. Whenever he has fellow comedians on that are like his friends, they often go on to the topic of how it used to be, he said, in the circles with comedians, is there was a famine mentality is the phrase he uses for it. And it was just like nobody wanted to talk about anyone else because it felt like there wasn't enough to go around. And so like you'd go without if you like accidentally promoted somebody else, and then you'd be afraid that like now everybody's going to flock to that person instead of you. And so everybody, it was like kind of dog eat dog, and it's shifted away from that is the way he described. And now they have built this very strong community that is actually helping everybody in the long run. And it hasn't had that. And so I feel like bands could benefit from getting on board with that too, in the way that you're describing. And I don't know if that's the mentality. I don't know if people aren't sharing other bands if, because they're afraid that it's going to like take away from what they're doing.
I mean,
Or-
I guess it depends
I
on
don't
what
know.
you're trying to do, right? If you're trying to be like a band that doesn't tour, if you look at like Deathspell or someone like that, that probably doesn't matter as much. You're trying to keep some mystique and, you just let the music speak for itself. But if you're trying to be a band that's actually going to tour and get yourself out there, you've got to have a common connection like that. Like, you talk about local bands that nobody remembers. It's the ones that like didn't watch other bands, didn't try to make friends with anybody in their scene, didn't do any of that. And with the internet, you kind of have to do it there too. You connect with your scene when you play shows, but then connect with the internet, and people might get you shows as you start to tour around the country. That's kind of what it seems like.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe it's just some of these bands are just so damn busy with their own stuff. They don't have time to be, arsed with other people's stuff. And, they're
That's
probably not
fair,
even
too. listening
to it. So, I mean, that's fair. So I'm not saying like you have to play that game, but I think if you have the time, I think it's worth it. Cause again, you're building community, and you have the opportunity to kind of then band together at that point and help each other out, which in the long run helps you out too. And that's something I kind of want to do with this site. I've been trying to do too. Like I've formed, a friendship with Christian over at Mathcore Index. And I think that's really cool. And it's just mainly because I think he's a cool dude and I like what they're doing, but it's also had the added effect of, I can help him promote some of his stuff wherever I can. And then they can help me with some stuff. And then now I'm trying to branch out. I talk with, the Grim Lord over at the Grim Tower. And, I talk with you, but obviously now we're like working on the same platform. Reached out to Heavy Metal History, which is a pretty cool podcast, and we're planning on doing an episode together at some point. And I think it'll be cool to do that same thing with sort of the podcast review, whatever community, is just help each other out and just also just have fun together. And it has that added effect of sort of building a brand, kind of like we were saying with Artisan Era, where it feels more just like a collective and people are cool and they're not at odds with each other. I know I felt bad. Dadcore reached out to me like a year ago on Instagram, and I never read my Instagram messages. I sort of just go on there, post up what I'm posting, see if anyone commented, and I get off. But they like almost exactly a year ago reached out to me, and but I responded now, and I was like, shit, man. So if like Dadcore is listening, like I'm totally down with like doing a collab with you all too, because I think Dadcore does some good and funny shit too, and from one dad to another too. So that would, maybe we should do an episode about being metal dads. I'd be down for that.
I'd listen to it. It sounds like an interesting idea.
Yeah. All right. Well, any closing thoughts?
No, I think we've gone pretty far into what I can think of out of everything that I've actually had time to listen to in depth. I think we've kind of covered what I would consider the best of it and what you would consider the best of it. And I'm excited for the second half of the year. It sounds like there's still a ton of stuff to come based on some of the teasers I've seen from labels I like. You look at like Tate and Blood is going to have one like at the very end of the year, and that's already, I'm super stoked for that. And there's tons of stuff that I don't even know about. Like World Terror Committee's been pretty silent since releasing one album in January.
Yeah,
so
that's
I
true.
feel like they're going to have a back half. They're probably just unleash everything around the same time. So there's a bunch of labels like that where I think they're just going to do everything in the second half of the year.
Yeah. But yeah, and you heard it here. This is the definitive best of 2019 so far. No, I
sort
mean,
of ranked,
yeah.
sort of not ranked.
Yeah. No, I mean, the whole idea is you're gonna like some of these releases, you're gonna hate some of them, and that's cool. This is why when I post up a so-called review on YouTube, it's called a quick opinion, because ultimately that's all it is just my opinion. So check this stuff out. If you hate it, cool. If you love it, let us know. I do read the comments, I respond to them, and I appreciate that. Once more, please do subscribe on whatever platform you're on. Again, this is on iTunes, CastBox, YouTube, and BitChute. I tried to get up on Spotify. I'm not sure if that's running yet. So I need to check in on that again. But yeah, and whichever you're on, please do give us a rating, a like, share, so that you can spread the good word of all these amazing bands. And that's ultimately what I want to do by building our audience, is to just have a bigger platform and a bigger voice to be able to share all this cool stuff, and also hopefully make it interesting and entertaining along the way. Also, feel free to hit up our Patreon. $1 a month would be appreciated, but totally not required. There are some perks at higher tiers, and you get early access to these episodes. And then, again, if you're listening on anything other than YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube as well, because there are other videos and other content that I put up here that do not show up just on the podcast on any other platform. Mathcore Index Fest, please do buy tickets to that if you're planning on going to Oakland, California, or will be in that area. I really want to promote shows like that because it's so rare to get that all in one go, and it comes but once a year, and if people don't support it, then it's going to disappear because it won't be sustainable. So definitely check that out. I'll leave a link to tickets down in the description. So this is Flight of Icarus and Chris Dahlberg signing off. And
we will talk to you next time.
Yeah, see you in the trenches.